The gates of Stonewake Hold did not make the same groaned sound as the dwarves closed it. Dwarves of the Stonewake Hold spoke with the finality of a mountain sealing a tomb. Xeeona Septhyr did not look back. He did not need to see his new friends, the two silhouettes on the battlements, one broad, the other leaning on his axe, to know they were watching him go. Dwarves did not possess the elven grace of a farewell. They did not have the human desperation of a promise to return either. They simply stood there, solid as the rock they worshipped, and let the silence say what was necessary or not. The warmth of the dwarven hearths faded from his skin within the mountain pass, opening to the northern forests. The north was a jealous mistress. She did not tolerate the lingering heat of comfort. For 3 days, Xeeona followed the old game trails that wound through the throat of the northern forests. He moved with the silent efficiency of a ranger who viewed his own body as a tool. His short sword, unadorned and blunt-looking in its sheath, tapped rhythmically against his thigh. He had expected the usual greetings of the wilderness, the disturbing challenge of an orc scouting party, the high-pitched chattering of stupid goblins in the canopy, maybe some bandits who are looking for trouble, or the simple, honest hunger of a mountain cat. Instead, he found a silence so thick that it felt physical. The forest was holding its breath. On the 4th afternoon, the scent of wood smoke drifted through the trees. It was thin, sweet, and somehow misplaced. Xeeona slowed, his boots pressing into the crust of the snow with a cat's weight. He did not draw his steel, not yet, but his thumb rested on the guard. He found the camp nestled in a natural hollow. The fire was a bed of glowing orange eyes, pulsing with slight heat. A spit hung over the coals, yet there was no meat. Some bedrolls lay spread across the frozen ground, neat and undisturbed. Xeeona scanned the surroundings. There were no chests of stolen coin, no broken crates of wine, no trophies of the road. It was as if a company of men had simply decided to stop existing in the middle of the forest. He knelt by the edge of the camp, his cold green eyes tracking the dents in the snow. A set of boot prints, a bandit by the depth of the heel, marched 5 paces toward the trees. Then they stopped. Not a stumble, not a leap. The prints simply ended mid-walk. There was no sign of a struggle, no blood, and no magical residue that his half-elven senses could perceive. The wind tugged at his wavy hair, exposing the thin scar across his receding brow. He felt a prickle of unease, not fear, but the clinical recognition of a predator that could not see its prey. He pushed further north, the silence growing until it became a ringing in his ears. Even the birds had vanished. The absence of life was more terrifying than the presence of a real monster. He found another camp just as the sun began to bleed out behind the mountain peaks. It was a smaller camp, like a temporary waypoint. The fire here was also burning, the smoke rising in a straight, mocking line. And there, sitting on a log beside the flames, was the first living soul he had seen in days. It was a halfling. The creature was lean, lacking the typical roundness of his kin. He wore clothes of fine, tailored wool, deep plums and golds that looked absurdly vibrant against the grey-white of the flora. A short, fur-lined cloak was draped over his shoulders, and a small silver-hilted dagger hung at his hip, looking like a toy compared to the heavy and dangerous blades of the north. Xeeona stepped out from the shadows, his short sword remaining in its sheath. Though his posture was a coiled spring, he stopped 10 paces away. The halfling did not jump. He did not reach for his weapon. He simply looked up, his face remarkably calm for someone sitting alone in a graveyard of a forest. The two of them stood in the dying light, the weathered half-elf ranger with his leather armour and receding hair, and the pristine, overdressed stranger. Neither spoke. The only sound was the crackle of the fire and the distant, lonely howl of a wind that carried no scent of life. The firelight reflected in the halfling's eyes, showing a spark of defiance that seemed too large for his small size. He adjusted his plum-coloured tunic, smoothed the fur of his cloak, and offered a bow that belonged in a southern regions, not a blood-stained clearing in the north. "Brannick Quicktoe," he said, his voice surprisingly calm, "traveller, raconteur, and, as you might have guessed, a man of exceptional fortitude." Xeona's gaze remained like cold iron. He noted the fine stitching of the halfling's clothes and the sack of even a single piece of trail dirt. "You're a long way from any soul, Brannick. The North does not care for fortitude. It consumes." Xeona's thumb traced the hilt of his simple short sword. "How are you still breathing? I have seen veterans of the border wars disappear into these wilderness before they even blinked an eye." Brannick puffed out his chest. "Bravery, Master Ranger. Pure, unadulterated pluck. Most folk run from the shadows. I simply walk through them." Xeona leaned forward, the scar on his receding brow tightening. "Bravery does not explain why these bandits' camps are empty. No blood, no struggle, just vanished. Did you see them? The men who once sat where you sit now?" The halfling's bravado wavered, if only for a heartbeat. He looked at the glowing embers. "I found the fires warm and the seats empty. I assumed they had simply moved on." Xeona knew the halfling folk were famous for their stout hearts, but this felt different, an ignorance that bordered on the supernatural. He did not trust, but the silence of the forest was becoming a weight he did not wish to carry alone. They spent the night in the hollow of the empty, abandoned camp. Xeona did not sleep. He merely rested his eyes for some moments, listening to the impossible silence. The morning brought a frost wind that turned the world to glass. "There's a village 2 leagues south," Xeona said as they rose. "The cold will kill you before the wolves do if you insist on staying in the open." Brannick grinned. "Lead the way then. I've always found that tall folk make excellent windbreaks." They walked for hours through the unwelcome cold wind. The lack of animal life was a screaming void in Xeona's senses. Then the sound finally returned, the harsh, ragged breathing of men. 3 bandits stepped from the tree line. They were desperate souls, wrapped in mangy furs, their eyes wide with a frantic, starving hunger. They did not speak. They simply charged. Xeona's hand blurred to his side, drawing his short sword in a single fluid motion. He stepped into the path of the first man, his movements brutal and efficient. Steel bit through leather and bone. He parried a rusted axe with a disturbing clatter of metal, then drove his blade upward into the attacker's open throat. As he turned to face the last bandit, Xeeona glanced toward where Brannick had been standing seconds ago. The halfling was gone. There was no sound of running, no rustle of snow, no cry of fear. The space beside Xeeona was simply empty, as if Brannick Quicktoe had never existed, or vanished. The last bandit lunged. Xeeona sidestepped the thrust, caught the man's wrist, and snapped it with a sickening pop. He finished the fight with a clean downward strike that silenced the bandit forever. Xeeona stood among the fallen bandits, his breathing shallow, his blade dripping dark red onto the white drifts. He scanned the trees, his dark green eyes searching for the coward or the corpse. Brannick! A soft cough came from behind a massive pine 20 paces away. The halfling stepped out, looking perfectly untouched and unharmed. His plum tunic was still crisp, his hair was still neat. Xeeona approached him, his sword still drawn. "You did not run. I would have heard your steps. You did not hide. I would have seen you move." Brannick looked down at his chest. Tucked beneath his tunic was a small, blackened silver charm on a leather cord. It hummed with a low, discordant vibration that made Xeona's teeth ache. "It's a gift," Brannick whispered, his usual confidence replaced by a hollow tremor. "Or a curse. I don't truly know. It's an old magic, Master Ranger. It triggers only when death is close, truly imminent. It tears me out of the path of the blow and places me somewhere safer." Xeeona looked at the charm, then at the empty forest. "It moved you to safety before the bandits even reached us." "That's the trouble," Brannick said, his eyes darting to the shadows between the trees. "It saves me from the blade I see, but lately it has been triggering when I am all alone. It tears me away from nothing at all. It knows when I am about to die, Xeeona, but it never tells me what is about to kill me, and that's why I trusted you without a doubt. It would have saved me if you possessed any danger." Xeeona looked back at the empty bandit camps they had found. He realized then that the bandits hadn't left. They had been harvested. "We need to move," Xeeona said, his voice a low growl of steel. "Now." The detour was not a decision, it was a mandate of stone. A massive boulder, jagged and ancient as the mountain's spine, lay across the narrow throat of the northern forest pass. It had not fallen recently. No fresh scars marked the cliffs above, and no shattered pine boughs lay crushed beneath its weight. It simply existed where it should not be, as if the earth itself had shifted to delay their progress to the village. "I don't like it," Xeeona muttered, his hand resting habitually on the pommel of his unadorned short sword. His cold green eyes scanned the ridges, searching for the telltale glint of steel or the unnatural silhouette of a bandit. The forest remained like a silent tomb. No bandits surged from the brush, no orcs barked challenges, and the lack of even a single bird's cry gnawed at his focus. They had to turn east, forced into a deeper, more tangled stretch of the forest where the shadows felt thick enough to touch. Xeeona moved with the measured, barely visible breath of a man who had forgotten the sound of his own name. his boots finding their place in the packed snow without a sound. Beside him, Brannick's vibrant, plum-coloured cloak was a garish wound against the grey-white ground. Hours later, the fatigue of the north and the lingering ache in his ribs demanded a short rest. They found a small opening where the wind was muffled by dense trees. Xeeona lowered himself onto a fallen trunk, his senses still sharp. Yet the weirdness of the silence was beginning to cloud his mind with suspicion. The strike was nearly silent, a faint thwip, a sound no louder than a snapping twig. Xeona's hand went to his neck as a sharp, cold sting pierced his skin just above his collarbone. He pulled away a slender piece of dark wood, tipped with a glistening resin. A poison. Xeeona. Brannick's voice was small, hesitant. The ranger didn't answer. The world tilted. His vision, usually as focused as a predator's, began to fracture. He fumbled with a pouch at his belt, pulling out a small vial of bitter antidote. He swallowed it in a single gulp, but the fire in his veins did not fully extinguish. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird, and a cold sweat slides across his receding brow. "Where are they?" Xeeona growled, his short sword sliding from its sheath with a dry hiss. He tried to stand up, but his knees betrayed him. He looked at Brannick, and then he saw something unusual. Tucked into the halfling's fine, gold-threaded belt was a miniature mechanical device. A dart thrower, crafted from dark, polished brass. "You!" Xeeona hissed, the edge of his blade wavering toward the smaller man. "You carry the weapon of an assassin." Brannick's eyes went wide, his face draining of all colour. He looked down at his own belt, his hands trembling as they hovered over the weapon. I swear by the deep halls, Xeeona, I've never seen this in my life. I didn't feel it. I don't know how it got there." Xeeona stared at him through the haze of the poison still lingering in his veins. His instinct, honed by years of surviving the brutal honesty of the North, told him the halfling was telling the truth. He had watched Brannick for days. The halfling was many things: a braggart, a coward, a man of strange magical charms, but he was not a master of sleight of hand. If he had been carrying a brass weapon at his hip, Xeeona would have noticed the glint of it just after they met. Yet, the clearing was empty. There was no one else. Unknown to them, perched on a frost-covered branch 20 paces above, a figure watched. He was a shadow within shadows, his attire a masterpiece of camouflage that blurred his silhouette into the bark and needles. He was a thief of high pedigree, a man whose obsession was not with gold, but with the perfect execution of a plan. He looked down at the staggering ranger and the frantic halfling, a thin, brilliant smile stretching across his face. The game was only beginning. The poison was a living thing inside Xeona's veins, a sluggish, oily heat that turned his blood to lead. Despite the antidote, the edges of the world remained blurred, the towering pines of the northern forest leaning inward like spectators at an execution in an arena. His breathing was slow and measured, each exhale a thin plume of frost that vanished into the unnatural silence. The forest was stripped bare of life. No mountain cats prowled the thickets, no bandits, no orcs, no other dangers, and even the wind seemed to have forgotten how to howl. Beside him, Brannick Quicktoe was like a splash of colour, his plum-coloured tunic and gold-threaded lilac cloak looking more like a target than a traveller's attire. Xeona's cold green eyes drifted once more to the halfling's belt. It wasn't just the mechanical brass dart thrower anymore. Tucked into the fine leather were materials that spoke of a very specific, very lethal expertise. Coils of hair-thin copper wire, jagged steel triggers, and vials of a pungent dark oil. Trap ingredients. "Stop," Xeeona said. The word wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of a drawn blade. He planted his boots in the packed snow, his hand resting on the pommel of his unadorned shortsword. Brannick stumbled to a halt, his hands fluttering nervously. "Master Ranger? The village can't be more than a league. We shouldn't linger in the open." "You told me you were a traveller, a man of pluck," Xeeona rasped, his voice grating like stone on stone. He gestured with a sharp nod toward the halfling's hip. "A traveller does not carry sapper's wire. A man of pluck does not carry the components of a high-tier trap maker. And I assume that dart thrower didn't just find you, Brannick. You know exactly how it works." The halfling's bravado, usually as thick as his wool cloak, finally shattered. He looked down at the snow, his shoulders sagging. "I was a specialist, Xeeona, in the south, under the service of a baron who valued things that didn't belong to him. I wasn't a petty cut-purse. I was the one they sent when the locks were made of magic and the halls were filled with dangers." He reached for the blackened silver charm at his neck, his fingers trembling. "I quit that life. I took this thing because I thought it was just a valuable thing, a retirement fund. I didn't know it was a tether to a world that won't let me die. I haven't touched a tool of the trade since I crossed the border, I swear it." Xeeona watched him, his gaze piercing through the haze of the poison still lingering inside his body. He wanted to believe the fear in the halfling's voice, but the dangers of the north had taught him that truth was a luxury the dying couldn't afford. They began to move again, but Xeona's senses were screaming. He noted a slight, nearly invisible disturbance in the white drifts ahead, a patch of lichen scraped from a rock as if by a gloved hand. He threw an arm out, catching Brannick's across the chest and pinning him back. "Don't move." Xeeona knelt, his fingers carefully touching the top layer of snow. Beneath the snow lay a masterpiece of malice. A pressure plate of cold-forged iron was rigged to a series of tension springs. Coiled around the mechanism was the exact same copper wire Brannick carried, and the steel triggers were identical to the ones on the halfling's belt. If they had taken one more step, a dozen poisoned spikes would have driven upward, shredding muscle and bone. "Your craft," Xeeona hissed, looking up at the halfling. His short sword was drawn now, the steel gleaming dully in the pale light. "Your wire, your triggers. Explain to me why I shouldn't leave you as a bloody carcass here for the wolves." "I didn't do it!" Brannick's voice was a frantic whisper. "How could I? I've been in your sight every moment. I don't have the hands for this anymore, Xeeona. Someone is, or something is mocking me." Xeeona looked at the trap, then back at the silent, empty woods. The halfling was right. He hadn't left Xeona's side, which meant someone or something was moving ahead of them, something fast enough to scout their path before them, steal Brannick's own tools or use the exact same ones, and set a professional-grade ambush in the time it took Xeona to blink. High above, nestled in the frost-laden branches of an ancient oak, the obsessive thief adjusted his cowl. He was a shadowy weight, his attire is a shifting tapestry of greys and whites that mimicked the winter forest. He watched Xeona's suspicion bloom into hatred with a quiet, brilliant intensity. He didn't want their blood yet. He wanted to see the ranger's discipline dissolve into the madness of betrayal. The thief leaned back, a thin, needle-sharp smile spreading across his face. He reached into a hidden pocket and toyed with another piece of a trap kit. The game was far more entertaining than the hunt. The dense canopy of the northern forest began to thin, giving way to a small road, where the village of Oakhaven lay huddled against the base of a jagged ridge. Xeona moved slowly with grace, each step through the deep, frozen drifts a testament to the discipline of his athletic frame. The poison from the thief's dart still simmered in his blood, a dull, throbbing heat that made the scar on his receding brow ache in the cold. Beside him, Brannick Quicktoe was uncharacteristically quiet, his vibrant plum cloak stained with the grey slush of the trail, his eyes darting toward the obsidian shadows of the pines. They reached the outskirts of the village, but the expected sounds of a living village, the ring of a blacksmith's hammer, the shouts of children, the scent of baking bread, were absent. Instead, there was only the scenery of untended cattle and the rhythmic creak of a swinging gate. Xeona slowed, his thumb resting on the guard of his unadorned shortsword. He scanned the streets with cold, green-grey eyes that missed nothing. "Something is wrong," Xeona murmured, his voice a dry ruh. He noted the lack of struggle. No doors were splintered, no fires had been set to the thatched roofs, and no corpses littered the muddy lanes. Even the livestock remained in their pens, safe and unmolested. It was a ghost town, preserved in a moment of absolute terrifying normalcy. Perhaps they saw us coming and decided a halfling and a half-elf weren't worth the trouble, Brannick offered, though his voice lacked its usual bravado. Xeona didn't answer. He stepped into the village square, his boots crunching on the frost-hardened earth. Suddenly, a figure erupted from behind a stack of seasoned firewood. It was a man, his face a mask of terror and filth, wielding a rusted scythe with a desperate wild strength. He screamed a wordless war cry, charging directly at Xeona. The ranger did not flinch. His reaction was efficient and brutal, stripped of any real flair. He stepped inside the arc of the scythe, the metal whistling past his shoulder, and delivered a sharp, compact strike with the hilt of his sword to the man's chin. The villager collapsed into the mud, gasping for air as his weapon clattered away. Xeona loomed over him, his shadow long and menacing. "I have no quarrel with you, man. Speak. Why is this place a tomb?" The villager looked up, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and confusion. "You, the half-elf, and the little one, he told us. The warrior told us you were coming." "What warrior?" Xeona demanded, his grip tightening on his sword. "A man. Handsome, like a lord from the south," the villager wheezed, clutching his chest. He came yesterday. Warned the elders that a half-elf ranger, a vagabond with a scarred face, and a dangerous halfling assassin were hunting for sport. He said you'd bring fire and blood. Then at night the arrows started, black-shafted things that hissed through the air. Everyone panicked. They fled into the deeper woods, thinking the butchers had arrived. I stayed. I'm tired of being hunted by bullies. Xeona's jaw tightened. The warrior had described them perfectly, weaponizing the village's fear. This wasn't a bandit's raid or an orc's hunger. It was a calculated game of psychological attrition. Someone was sculpting a narrative of betrayal and malice around them, isolating them even from the innocent villagers. "We are not your enemies," Xeeona said, his voice softening slightly as he looked at the man's shaking hands. He reached out, helping the villager to his feet with the same strength he used to kill. "But we are being followed by someone who finds your terror amusing." High above, perched on the steep shingled roof of the village tavern, the obsessive thief watched. He adjusted his grey-white cloak, blending seamlessly into the stone and wood. A thin, brilliant smile stretched across his face as he watched the ranger's patience fray. The thief did not need a blade to win this fight. He had the hearts of men to play with, and the masterpiece was nearly finished. The village of Oakhaven was little more than a smudge of grey against the rising mist of the forest. Behind them, the silence of the small town, the rhythmic chuckles of the wandering chickens, the distant lowing of cattle, faded into a suffocating silence. Xeeona stopped. Every step had become a calculated battle against the leaden weight in his limbs. The poison, a foul, slow-burning venom delivered by a black-ribboned bolt 2 days prior, was a fever in his marrow. The antidote was no use but slowing the pain a little. He didn't look at the halfling immediately. Instead, he found a jagged slab of grey rock and sat. The movement was stiff, lacking his usual grace. He leaned forward, forearms resting on his knees, his hands steady despite the fire screaming in his veins. Beneath the thinning hairline of his brow, his cold grey-green eyes locked onto Brannick. "Sit," Xeeona said. The word wasn't a request. It was a low, guttural command that seemed to vibrate in the damp air. Brannick fumbled with the hem of his oversized tunic, his oversized feet shifting nervously in the dirt. "Xeeona, sir, we really should keep moving. It seems the poison is troubling you." "The poison is the least of our concerns," Xeeona interrupted, his voice dangerously calm. He reached up, tracing the thin scar that ran across his forehead. "Strange things follow you, halfling, more than just bad luck. 2 days ago, when the bandits had us cornered, I saw it. You didn't run, you didn't hide, you simply weren't there anymore, and then you were, 10 paces away, looking as confused as a birthed calf." Brannick opened his mouth to offer a frantic lie, but the look in Xeona's eyes, the predatory focus of a half-elf who had seen too much death to be fooled, silenced him. "I know what you carry," Xeeona continued. "A charm, stolen from a man in the south who counts his gold in blood. A trinket designed to trigger when death is imminent. A blink for the cowardly. But magic like that doesn't just happen. It leaves a scent, a trail." Xeeona leaned in closer, the scent of pine and old leather clinging to him. "There are 2 possible truths here, halfling. Either the danger I face is you, your very presence acting as a beacon for every shadow in these woods. Or someone back there knows exactly how that cursed bauble works. Someone who isn't satisfied with letting you keep it. You have a keen mind for a ranger whose blood is turning to vinegar. A new voice drifted through the trees. It was a voice like silk over whetstone, tough, calm, and utterly devoid of mercy. From the shadows of a massive gnarled oak stepped a man clad in midnight-hued leathers. He didn't carry the bulk of a warrior, but he moved with the precision of a clockwork mechanism. A thin, obsessive smile played on his lips as he adjusted a pair of dark gloves. "The thief!" Brannick whimpered, shrinking back. "The thief?" The newcomer chuckled, his eyes fixed entirely on Xeeona. "A bit generic, isn't it? But accurate enough. I've tracked that little bauble across 3 provinces. It belongs to a lord who does not appreciate his toys being handled by vermin." The thief stepped into the clearing, ignoring the halfling entirely. His gaze lingered on the dark veins visible on Xeona's neck, pulsing beneath the skin. 2 days, Ranger. That's how long the black vein has been singing in your heart. Most men would be screaming for the end by now. You're sitting on a rock playing Inquisitor. He shook his head in mock admiration. Simple antidotes won't touch it. It's a specialized brew. It eats the magic in the blood, and since you've more than a touch of the fair folk in you, it's eating you slower than it would a common man. The thief held up a small translucent vial filled with a shimmering silver liquid. A trade. Give me the halfling and the charm. In return, you live to see another sunrise. Or, his smile widened, becoming something jagged and cold. I take the charm by force. I'll kill you first. Which, let's be honest, will be more of a mercy than a fight in your condition. And then I'll find a way to peel that trinket off the halfling's cooling corpse. You can barely hold your head up, Ranger. Don't die for a thief who wouldn't spit on you if you were on fire. Silence reclaimed the woods. Brannick looked between the 2 men, trembling. Xeeona didn't look at the vial. He didn't look at the thief's weapons. He looked at the ground for a heartbeat, and then a low, rasping sound escaped his throat. It was a laugh, dark, bitter, and entirely devoid of fear. He stood up, slowly, his muscles protesting with every inch. He didn't reach for a bow. He didn't try to cast a spell. His hand went to the hilt of his plain, unadorned short sword. "You speak of my condition as if it were a cage," Xeeona said, a dangerous, jagged grin splitting his face. The cold green of his eyes flared with a sudden predatory light. But a wounded wolf is the only one you truly need to fear. The steel hissed as it left the scabbard. The blade was simple, straight, and sharp enough to divide the wind. "Steel is enough for the likes of you," Xeeona whispered, his stance shifting into a lethal low-gravity crouch. "Come and take it." The thief did not rush him. He stepped lightly across the frost-hardened earth, boots whispering over snow as if the forest itself conspired to carry his weight. His midnight leathers caught no light. His presence was a distortion in the air, a patient smile carved into the dusk. Xeeona moved first. Steel hissed through the cold as he drove forward, ignoring the tremor in his limbs, ignoring the sluggish burn of the black vein chewing at his marrow. His blade cut in a low diagonal meant to cripple. The thief turned his wrist. A slender dagger, its edge shimmering with a faint hungry sheen, caught the strike and slid it aside as if redirecting a falling leaf. The impact jarred Xeona's arm to the shoulder. Before he could recover, a boot struck his ribs. Not a killing blow, a reminder. "You are admirable," the thief murmured, circling, "but admiration is not mercy." Xeona lunged again, a thrust for the heart, a pivot into a backhand slash. The thief did not even counterattack. He simply moved, gliding, folding, slipping inside the arc of the blade. A knuckle drove into Xeona's jaw, an elbow hammered his shoulder, a heel clipped his knee, each touch precise, measured, playful. The ranger tasted iron. His vision narrowed to a tunnel of white breath and dark motion. He forced his lungs to fill, forced his feet to anchor. He had fought ogres in mountain passes. He had killed men twice this one's size. He had survived winters that broke the bones of lesser folk. He would not be toyed with. With a snarl that tore at his throat, Xeona abandoned economy. He unleashed everything. Brutal, relentless, a storm of steel. His short sword became a metronome of violence. High cut, low cut, reverse grip stab, pivoting sweep. Snow burst beneath his boots as he drove the thief backward step by step. For the first time the smile faltered. The thief parried twice, 3 times, then misjudged the 4th. Xeona's blade carved across his forearm, biting through leather and drawing a sharp line of red. The thief hissed and sprang back, eyes sharpening. "You still have teeth," he said softly, flexing his wounded arm. Blood darkened his glove. Interesting. He came forward differently now. Gone was the dance. His dagger moved with killing intent, short, vicious arcs aimed for arteries and joints. Xeona blocked 1, 2, 3 strikes, sparks flaring in the gloom. The 4th cut grazed his thigh. The 5th tore across his shoulder. The poison in his veins flared in protest, turning his muscles to stone. He staggered. Somewhere in the blur of motion he glanced toward where Brannick had stood. Empty. The halfling's charm had sensed the edge of death and stolen him from it. Of course it had. The thief pressed in, relentless now. A flurry of blows crashed against Xeona's failing guard. Steel rang, his wrist buckled. A kick to the chest sent him sprawling into the snow. His sword slipped from numb fingers. The thief stood over him, breath steady, eyes bright with cruel delight. "You fought beautifully, Ranger," he said, wiping blood from his arm. "Truly, your will is intoxicating. I would have enjoyed breaking it slowly." He raised the dagger. "It is a shame." Xeona pushed himself onto one elbow. His vision swam, but his gaze locked onto the man above him. Cold, unyielding hatred burning in green-grey depths. The thief's smile widened, then froze. His eyes snapped wide. Xeona did not understand at first. Then he saw the shift in the man's posture, the sudden rigidity. Behind him, Brannick Quicktoe stood there, small and pale against the snow, his plum cloak spattered with frost. His fine southern manners were gone. His face was carved from something harder. The halfling's short dagger was buried to the hilt at the base of the thief's spine. Not a deep wound, not a mortal one, by size alone, but precise. The thief's fingers spasmed, his dagger fell from slackened grip, his body locked, trembling as if seized by invisible chains. "You," he whispered. Brannick's voice was steady. "I may not have the hands for grand traps anymore. but I remember where to place a blade." Xeeona did not waste the gift. He rolled, seized his fallen sword and rose on instinct alone. With the last of his strength, he stepped inside the paralyzed man's guard and drew a clean, merciless line across his throat. Hot blood spilled into white snow. The thief collapsed without grace, his obsessive smile finally erased. Silence reclaimed the clearing. Xeeona stood swaying, blade hanging loose at his side. The forest tilted. The poison roared in his ears. Then darkness took him. He woke to the scent of pipe smoke. Cold air filled his lungs, clearer now, less burdened. The ache in his veins was dulled, like an echo rather than a scream. Beside him, resting against a fallen log, sat Brannick Quicktoe. The halfling puffed thoughtfully on a small pipe, a thin ribbon of smoke curling into the pale sky. On the ground between them lay a translucent vial, empty. Xeeona shifted slightly. The world did not spin. "Don't," Brannick said without looking at him. "Normally that antidote takes several hours to mend what Blackvein does. It hasn't even been one." He exhaled smoke, lips twitching. "You woke rather quickly." Xeeona studied him. The tremor was gone from the halfling's hands. His posture was relaxed, almost assured. The mask of bravado and cowardice had slipped away, revealing something measured and deliberate beneath. "You stayed," Xeeona rasped. Brannick gave a small, humorless smile. "You were rather convincing about wounded wolves." Silence lingered. "Thank you," Xeeona said at last. Brannick looked at him properly then, and something like sincerity flickered in his eyes. "No," he said quietly. "I should be the one thanking you. I never meant to lie as much as I did. You truly did save my life." He tapped the charm at his neck. "Whatever else I told you, whatever half-truths or embellishments, I'm not a bad man, Xeeona. I've done ugly work, but I am not rotten." He stood, brushing snow from his cloak. "Our paths divide here. There are matters I must settle, debts, perhaps even apologies." Xeeona watched him go. Brannick paused once as if considering a final jest, then simply nodded and turned away into the thinning trees. This time, he did not vanish. His steps were audible, deliberate. When Xeeona finally rose, his strength had not fully returned, but it was enough. He sheathed his simple short sword and turned his face toward the deeper north. The forest still held its breath, but so did he, and he walked on.